Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been so impressed to eavesdrop on your conversations this afternoon. It sounds like you've had an incredibly productive 2 weeks as well as today. It's hard to talk about civic tech and deliberative democracy or political participation and civic education without making reference to current events. I think the landscape has changed considerably for this conversation since would have been the case, say, 2 years ago, for any of you who participated in a gathering here 2 years ago. And so I want to say a little bit, I suppose, about how I think of the changes in the landscape and what I think those changes mean for anybody who cares about not merely the quantity of participation, but also the quality of it. So in my own experience of conversations about civic education, civic agency, participation, and so forth over the last 2 decades, I would say that the predominant theme has been, how do we motivate people to be civic agents? That is, there's been, in the various gatherings I've been part of, various organizations I've been part of, a sense that we could find a group of committed people ready to work on change. We could develop the tools for doing that, techniques of deliberative democracy, for example, or techniques of organizing to drive change in a specific community. And the question was always how to get more people to care. Right? We knew how to make change, we knew how to define change in ways that built on theories of justice, concepts of equity, and so forth. But I thought always that we were pushing against an incredible mountain of apathy. One heard this or registered it in the routine conversation about rates of voting, for example, work that Peter's done a lot on, and whether or not youth are turning out in political campaigns and so forth. It is without the case, the question that that issue is off the table. People are motivated. And we are seeing a level of participation that we haven't seen in a very long time, which means in some sense that the question has to be about quality rather than about motivating participation. So how do we know that we're seeing participation? You look at the numbers in the Brexit referendum, 72% turnout in the British population for that vote. The turnout rates in the Republican primary were exceptionally high. So the absolute number of votes cast in that primary, even though it's just a primary, it doesn't get close to the general election numbers. We're already running really high. Democratic numbers are high as well. I don't think that the differential was as great on the Democratic side as the Republican side. But that motivation in both of those contexts, the US and Europe, it's not just the UK, right? Turnout was high in some of the recent French elections as well, is also connected to polarization. Right? So people turn out when there are controversial issues at stake in relationship to which a polity is thoroughly divided. Yeah, that's all you need to motivate people to participate. But that makes the question of how one cultivates quality in democratic participation even harder. I'm a person who, you may know, has made arguments for many years that the core civic virtue is something called political friendship. And I make the argument that this is an ideal we should hold out for ourselves for our interactions with strangers, even people we disagree with, even people whose views we might consider odious, that even with such people, we ought to be able to interact with them as if they were friends. We don't actually have to like them. We just have to be really good at faking it, okay? And the idea is you fake it long enough, you make something, and what we make is a polity that can function. That's the sort of basic idea of the argument about political friendship. But in context of polarization as severe as we presently have, I think arguments like that ring false to a lot of people. They sound implausible. How on earth do you hold on to that ideal? And to focus the mind a little bit, let me just point out that for political scientists who study, for example, partisanship in Congress in particular, the rates of polarization in Congress currently equal the rates of polarization at the end of the Civil War. Okay? That's how bad it is. All right? Now that's just one dimension of division. Let's throw in another one. Think about economic inequality, income inequality. All right? In this country, in the US, at least in the US is at the top end of a spectrum if you look around the globe, but in the US, the spread, the income inequality spread and the wealth inequality spread are greater than they were in 1929. Okay? There is no center left in this country. And there's not much of a center left in Europe. So the question about the quality of participation and the question of whether an ideal like political friendship can be deployed requires one to think about how to operate in a context in which there's no center. Right? So I don't really have answers to that question. I'm hoping that all of you will put in good thought on that question. But I thought what I would try to do is just say a few more words about how I'm trying to think about that problem. How I'm trying to understand our way through that problem. And for one piece of it, I mean, there's a part of me that simply wants to reinforce my pre-existing argument about political friendship, but to say that it makes it even more important to actually actively conduct one's adversarial political work by trying to undermine the adversarial element of it. That is, recruit from the other side, find ways of actually peeling off some of the supporters on the other side. That seems like an important part of it. But another important part of it seems like there's a need for an even closer connection between a concern for democracy and genuine political thought about where centrist positions lie. And that's hard to do because we're all quite wedded to our partisan positions. But at the end of the day, there has to be some rebuilding of the middle, in economic terms, for starters, but also in political terms, in order for there to be space for us to occupy with democratic processes of compromise and ongoing contestation, right? And to some extent, I mean, that's, I think if you look at the Brexit case, that's a part of what that story is about. That is, Europe has such profound divisions in it at this point, and so little space for centrist policies, that there's not an imaginable approach to solving the existing problems, the refugee crisis, the slow growth economies, the inequality in the distribution of the rewards of the slow growth economy and so forth. There's not an imaginable way of solving those problems through political contestation. So I think actually as we think about participation, supporting people's ability to take part, we also have to revive our capacity to educate people in policy thinking. And this goes a little bit against the grain, I think, in some of the civic techie space, where a lot of the effort has been directed toward solutions that can bypass the political realm, right? We see so much dysfunction in the political realm. Why don't we just build around it, do other things, find solutions in our local communities, wherever else? And I suppose I want to say I think that's a mistake, actually. I think there's a lot of value in those additional solutions. Absolutely, they should be pursued, but not at the expense of understanding the policy realm and thinking it through. Which means then that in addition to capacities like organizing, the tools of an activist, the tools of using social media, forms of communication and coordination to build movements, one actually also needs to revisit policy paradigms. And that's hard work because the depth of knowledge involved in sort of economic policy and issues like trade policy, globalization, and so forth, it's a big ask. So there's a real intellectual demand, I think, in this current moment that comes along with any effort to rebuild civic capacities. So I guess the last thing I would want to say then is, so as I'm thinking about this problem, how to rebuild the center, how to recover quality in participation, one, I want to make this argument for an emphasis on the policy side of things. Two, I'm making an argument for the need for subject area expertise, which I think has fallen out of some of the civic education conversations. And then three, I am reaffirming the notion that even in these most extreme of circumstances, an ideal political friendship should still be held out as a possibility. I'm doing that mainly because I believe if you're not headed towards the right ideal, you won't fall short in the right place. Let me rephrase that slightly, right? I mean, we're going to fall short, whatever we try. And so I always try to figure out where's the thing I want to fall from, because that should be the place I want to be. So I continue to hold out political friendship, the fake it till you make something approach to interacting with strangers and people whom we may not, in fact, hold in regard as a critical element for rebuilding quality civic participation in current circumstances. Thank you.